The night was thick with the weight of despair. Snow fell in heavy silence over Castle Black, coating the bodies of traitors and the betrayed alike. Jon Snow lay lifeless, his dark curls matted with blood, his skin already losing its warmth. The men who had sworn loyalty to him had driven their daggers into his body, whispering, "For the Watch." Melisandre stood over him, her red robes billowing in the wind, her face an unreadable mask. Davos Seaworth watched from the shadows, his hands clenched into fists, helpless. "Bring him inside," she commanded in a voice as smooth as flowing wine. The remaining loyalists hesitated but obeyed, lifting Jon's body with grim reverence. They placed him in the same room where Stannis had once brooded over maps, where plans of war and honor had been whispered. But there was no more honor here, only the cold stench of death. Melisandre ran her fingers over Jon's pale face. "He has the blood of kings," she murmured. "His death was written in the flames, but so was his rebirth." Davos frowned. "You can bring him back?" The Red Woman's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "No." She let the words settle in the air before adding, "But I can give his soul to R'hllor, and through his sacrifice we will gain the strength to fight the coming darkness." Davos took a step back. "You mean to burn him?" She turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "It is the only way. The Lord of Light demands fire. The greatest power comes from sacrifice. I thought Stannis was the chosen one, but I was wrong. Jon Snow was always meant for something greater. His blood, his death, this is what will turn the tide." Davos felt rage boil in his chest. He had watched her burn a child, had seen the horror that came with her blind faith. "He's already dead. Isn't that enough for your God?" Melisandre ignored him, stepping forward to address the men gathered in the room. "If we let him rot, we gain nothing. But if we give him to the flames, R'hllor may yet grant us a vision, a weapon, something to stand against the Night King." The room was silent. Then, to Davos's horror, a few of the brothers nodded. Fear, desperation, these were powerful tools, and Melisandre wielded them well. That night the pyre was built outside the gates of Castle Black. The flames roared, casting long shadows on the cold walls. Jon Snow's body was placed atop the wooden heap, his cloak wrapped around him, his direwolf ghost howling in the distance. Davos stood apart, his heart pounding. "This is madness," he muttered. "This is wrong." But no one listened. Melisandre lifted her arms, her voice rising in an eerie chant, her ruby necklace gleaming with unnatural light. The fire leaped higher, and for a brief moment Davos swore he saw something, Jon's fingers twitching, his eyelids fluttering. But before he could speak, before he could step forward, the flames consumed him. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, and the last hope for the north turned to ash. The flames crackled hungrily, devouring the body of Jon Snow. His flesh, blackened, curling away from the bone, the thick stench of burning hair and blood twisting through the cold air. The gathered men of the Night's Watch stood motionless, their faces flickering between light and shadow as the fire danced in Melisandre's eyes. Davos Seaworth could not look away, though every fibre of his being screamed at him to stop this madness. His fists clenched at his sides, the rage in his heart barely restrained. He had seen this before, fire used as a tool for so-called divine justice. He had watched a child's screams be swallowed by the same flames that now devoured Jon Snow. Melisandre stood with her arms raised, her voice chanting in the old tongue. "Azor Ahai, come forth. Lord of Light, accept this sacrifice." A gust of wind howled through the courtyard, but the flames did not waver. They only burned brighter, hotter, licking at the sky as if reaching for something unseen. Ghost, Jon's direwolf, let out a piercing, heart-wrenching howl. It was a sound of pain, of loss, of something deeper than mere grief. Then it happened, a flash, a flicker. For just a moment the fire turned a shade darker, as though the very shadows were pulling at it. Melisandre's breath hitched, her chant faltering. The flames did not die down, but something shifted. Davos saw it. The men saw it. Jon's eyes opened. But they were not his eyes. They were dark, endless pools of shadow, the color of smoke and oblivion. The fire surged violently around him, but his body did not move, did not resist. A murmur of horror rippled through the watchers. One of the brothers stumbled back. "What is this?" Melisandre's lips parted, but no words came out. She had not expected this. Jon's mouth opened slightly, his blackened lips peeling apart, and a whisper emerged. Not his voice, not human, but something older, something twisted by the fire that had consumed him. "You have made a mistake." The wind roared, and the fire exploded outward, knocking men to the ground. Sparks rained from the sky, the embers swirling like dying stars. And then, as quickly as it had come, the fire died. What was left on the pyre was not Jon Snow. The body sat upright, the flesh still burning, but it did not burn away. The skin cracked, but beneath it, something dark pulsed like a second life. His hands twitched, his head tilted unnaturally as if testing its new form. Ghost whimpered, lowering himself to the ground, ears flat. He knew, they all knew. Jon Snow was gone. Something else had taken his place. The silence that followed was thick with terror. The men of the Night's Watch stood frozen, their breath visible in the freezing air, their hands trembling over their swords. But no steel could protect them from this. The thing that had once been Jon Snow turned its head, slow and deliberate, like a predator tasting the air. Its skin was cracked and blackened from the fire, but the wounds did not bleed. The flesh beneath was not red, not human, but something else. Something dark, shifting like smoke beneath a thin, ruined shell. Davos stumbled back, his mind screaming at him to run. This was wrong. This was not how death was supposed to work. He had seen men die, seen their bodies burn, seen their ghosts live on in the sorrow of those they left behind. But this was something else entirely. Melisandre. His voice was hoarse with fear. "What have you done?" The Red Woman stood motionless, her lips parted, her ruby necklace glowing brighter than before. This was beyond her power. She had called upon Ugla, but something else had answered. The creature's eyes, black and endless, settled on her. It tilted its head as if considering her. "You thought the fire would save you," it whispered, though its lips barely moved. "But the fire is not yours to command." Melisandre's breath shuddered. "You are not him." The thing smiled, a thin, brittle smile. "No," it agreed. A gust of icy wind howled through Castle Black, and the torches went out all at once. Darkness fell, thick and suffocating, the only light coming from the embers still clinging to the ruined body. The men around the pyre backed away, fear choking them. "Stay back!" One of the brothers drew his sword, but his hands shook so badly the steel nearly slipped from his grasp. The creature that had been Jon Snow rose slowly to its feet, the charred remains of his Night's Watch cloak hanging from his shoulders. It did not move like a man. There was something unnatural in the way its limbs carried it, like it was learning how to walk all over again. Davos grabbed Melisandre's arm. "Send it back," he hissed. "Whatever you did, undo it." She did not answer. Her face was pale, her eyes locked on the thing standing before them. Then it spoke again. "The dead do not belong to your god." And in that moment, the ground beneath Castle Black shook. Far beyond the wall, in the endless frozen darkness of the north, something stirred, and it was coming. The tremor beneath their feet was not just a shake, it was a warning. A cold, unnatural presence swept over Castle Black, seeping into the bones of every man standing near the ruined pyre. The creature that had once been Jon Snow lifted its head slightly, as if it felt something approaching, something that answered its presence. Davos's breath hitched. He had fought in countless battles, had seen men torn apart by swords and fire, but this was a terror he did not understand. "Melisandre," he whispered again, his grip tightening on her arm. "If you have any magic left in you, any prayer that works, now's the time." But the Red Woman was silent. Her hands trembled at her sides, her ruby necklace pulsing with flickering light. She had believed fire was the answer to everything, that R'hllor's will was absolute. But this thing standing before them was not his will. It was something older, something she could not control. The men of the Night's Watch finally broke from their paralysis. Some ran, disappearing into the halls of Castle Black, their footfalls echoing in the darkness. Others gripped their swords, but none of them dared step forward. Then the creature moved, slow at first, its charred feet crunching against the frozen ground. Its black eyes, endless pits of swirling shadow, fixed on the men before it, assessing, calculating. One of the brothers, a young man with more fear than sense, lunged. He let out a desperate cry, swinging his sword in a wild arc. The blade struck, but it did nothing. The steel passed through the creature's side as if slicing through air, meeting no flesh, no resistance. Then, in the span of a heartbeat, the man froze. His scream turned to a gasp as his body stiffened, his breath a thin cloud in the cold air. His skin, once flushed with the heat of battle, paled instantly, his lips turning blue, his veins blackening beneath his skin. His sword clattered to the ground, and then, with a sickening crack, his body collapsed inward, as if something had drained him from the inside. A pile of frozen, withered flesh and brittle bone hit the ground where he had stood. The men staggered back. A few fell to their knees, murmuring prayers that no god would hear. Davos felt his chest tighten. The others drained life this way, the White Walkers, the Night King's servants. But this was different. The White Walkers brought the cold with them. But this creature was not cold. It was emptiness. It was hunger. And far beyond the wall, in the endless night, something was answering its call. The air grew heavier, thick with something unseen, something wrong. The men of the Night's Watch stood paralyzed, the horror before them unlike anything they had faced. This was not the work of the White Walkers. This was something older, something darker than the long night itself. The creature that had once been Jon Snow tilted its head, its blackened lips curving into something that might have been a smile if it were human. But there was no humanity left in it, only hunger, only darkness. Davos swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had fought monsters before, men who wore crowns, men who set fire to children, men who slaughtered for power. But this was not a man. This was something that should never have been pulled from the grave. "Fall back," he whispered, but the others did not move. They couldn't. Melisandre took a step forward, her breathing shallow. The flames of her torches had long since died, but the ruby at her throat still flickered weakly, as if desperately trying to ward off the thing before her. "This was not meant to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The creature laughed, a brittle, cracking sound like ice breaking underfoot. And yet it did. Its voice did not belong to Jon Snow. It was layered, echoing as though spoken from the depths of a bottomless pit. Melisandre's lips trembled. She had spent her life seeing in the flames, believing that fire was the answer, that R'hllor would guide her through the darkness. But now, standing before the thing she had brought back, she realized the truth. She had not called upon R'hllor's power. She had called upon something else, and it had answered. The wind howled through Castle Black, but it was no ordinary wind. It carried whispers, low and rasping, voices that did not belong to the living, and then, from the far distance, a horn blew, once, twice, 3 times. Davos's blood ran cold. He did not need to turn to know what it meant. The dead were coming. The gates of Castle Black stood tall, but beyond them, in the endless white of the north, shapes began to emerge from the darkness. Dozens at first. Then hundreds, and leading them, stepping from the shadows with glowing blue eyes, was a figure that sent fear lancing through every man present. The Night King had come. But he was not here for them. He was here for it. For whatever had taken Jon Snow's place, the cold deepened, seeping into the very bones of the men at Castle Black. The flames that had once burned Jon Snow to ash had long since died, leaving behind only the thing that had risen in his place. The darkness behind its eyes did not flicker, did not waver. It waited, and so did the Night King. The dead had come, their frozen forms stretching into the endless white beyond the wall. Their hollow blue eyes flickered like distant stars, unmoving, unbreathing. The Night King himself stood at the forefront, his expression unreadable, his chilling gaze locked onto the creature that had once been Jon Snow. Davos felt it, deep in his gut. Something was happening, something ancient, and beyond his understanding. The men of the Night's Watch did not breathe. They had seen death before, had fought against the Whites, had run from the White Walkers. But this was something different. The creature that had been Jon Snow took a step forward, slow and deliberate, the blackened remnants of his body, shifting the cracks in his flesh, revealing something deeper, something that moved beneath the skin like living smoke. It laughed, not like a man, not like anything human. It was a sound made of whispers, of cracking embers, of shadows curling. In firelight, and then it spoke. "You are late." The Night King did not answer. He did not need to. The air hummed between them, something unseen crackling in the space where they stood. Davos's heart pounded. He had no love for Jon Snow, but this was not him. This was something worse. The Whites around the Night King shifted uneasily, though they did not move of their own will. It was as if something else was pulling them back. The Night King raised a hand. Instantly the temperature dropped. The air turned so cold that the men's breaths froze in their throats. But the creature did not flinch. It merely smiled. And then it raised its own hand. The moment it did, something rippled through the night. The Whites staggered. Some fell. Others twisted unnaturally, their movements no longer controlled by the Night King. The bond had been severed. Davos felt a sickness twist in his stomach. The Night King had raised the dead, but whatever had taken Jon Snow's body, it could unmake them. The Night King tilted his head. For the first time, there was something in his icy gaze that was not indifference, recognition, realization. And then, in a voice like the scraping of stone over frozen earth, the creature whispered, "I was before you." The Night King's grip tightened around his blade, and then, with a sudden violent howl, the Whites charged. The world exploded into chaos. The Whites lunged forward, their frozen limbs moving with unnatural speed. Their shrieks pierced the night, echoing off the walls of Castle Black as they surged toward the creature that had once been Jon Snow. The men of the Night's Watch scattered, some drawing steel, others simply running, but none of them could take their eyes off what was happening. Davos had seen battle, had stood against impossible odds before, but nothing had prepared him for this. The creature did not move. It simply waited. The first White reached it, its blackened hands stretched forward, jagged nails aiming for its throat. But just as it was about to strike, it stopped, not by force, not by a sword or fire. It withered. Its skin shrunk against its bones, its flesh turning to ash before their eyes. Its eyes, once glowing an unnatural blue, dimmed to nothing. Then another and another. Each White that came close collapsed, their bodies draining of life, of purpose, as if something had reached inside them and torn away the very thing that animated them. Davos could not breathe. What in the name of the Seven? The Night King did not move. He watched, impassive, as his army, his creations, crumbled into nothing. His grip on his icy blade tightened, but his expression remained unreadable. Melisandre was trembling now. Her faith shattered before her eyes. She had seen fire consume the dead, had seen the Lord of Light's power, but this was something beyond fire. The creature turned its gaze toward the Night King. Slowly, almost mockingly, it tilted its head. "You do not belong here." The Night King took a single step forward. His cold breath curled in the air. The thing in Jon Snow's body smiled, and then it raised its hand once more. The ground beneath them shook. The cold itself recoiled. The Night King staggered. It was only for a second, but it happened. Davos's heart stopped. The Night King, the creature who had slaughtered thousands, who had raised the dead with a mere gesture, had been pushed back. The whites that had not yet turned to dust suddenly froze in place. Then, like puppets with their strings cut, they collapsed. Hundreds of bodies, falling all at once, lifeless and empty. The Night King's cold blue eyes narrowed. For the first time, the air around him shifted, not in anger, but something else, something close to wariness. The creature laughed again, its voice curling like smoke in the air. "You are nothing but a thief, an echo of a power you do not understand." Davos could barely process what he was hearing. The Night King, a thief? The cold intensified. The Night King moved. With a flick of his wrist, his blade sliced the air. The creature caught it, not with its hands, not with its body. The ice blade stopped mid-air, suspended. The world seemed to hold its breath. The Night King's grip tightened. The creature's black eyes burned. And then, in a voice that was neither human nor monstrous, it whispered, "You were never meant to rule the dead." And the Night King fell to his knees. The impossible had happened. The Night King, the ancient terror, the master of death, the enemy that had haunted the North for centuries, was kneeling. The men of the Night's Watch stood frozen, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Davos could not move, could not speak. The cold around them had not lifted, but something had changed, something fundamental. The creature that had been Jon Snow stared down at the kneeling Night King, its expression unreadable. The ice blade still hovered in the air, frozen between them, locked in a battle of power that no one truly understood. Davos had no love for the Night King. He had seen what the dead could do, had seen Hardhome, had seen the devastation in the wake of this monster. But now, looking at him, kneeling before the thing Melisandre had pulled from the grave, he realized something terrifying. The Night King was afraid. The creature smiled, a thin, brittle curve of the lips. "You are not death," it whispered, and the words rang out through the silent night. The Night King's blue eyes burned, but he did not move. The thing in Jon's body took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You are an intruder," it continued, its voice rippling like a distant storm. "You were made, not born." Davos's stomach twisted. What did that mean? The Night King clenched his fists, his frozen breath curling in the air. Then suddenly the sky above them split. A roar tore through the heavens. The wind howled as the clouds parted, revealing something massive, something that should not exist. Shadow passed over the moon, a shape with wings, vast and endless, its form shifting in ways that hurt the eye to comprehend. Davos felt his knees weaken. This was not a dragon. It was something older, something from before the world had been shaped, before men had given names to their fears. The Night King's head tilted upward, and for the first time, his cold expression shifted. Recognition. The creature that had been Jon Snow laughed, a quiet, knowing sound. You see it now, don't you? The ground shook, the sky screamed, and the thing that had taken Jon's body finally spoke its true name. And the Night King bowed, the Night King, the ancient terror of the North, the master of death itself, bowed. It was not an act of submission. It was not reverence. It was recognition. Davos stared, unable to believe what he was seeing. The Whites had collapsed. The White Walkers had not even tried to fight. And now, the very creature they had all feared for so long was kneeling before. Something worse. The thing inside Jon Snow's body did not react with pride, nor with arrogance. It simply watched, its blackened, ruined face betraying nothing. Then, from above, the shadow moved. The sky had split for it. The clouds shuddered in its presence, and it spoke, not in words, not in any human tongue. The sound was a weight, a force, that pressed against the very bones of Castle Black. It was language before language, the voice of something that had been buried in time itself. Davos fell to his knees, his ears ringing, his vision darkening at the edges. He felt the urge to scream, to claw at his own skin, to rip himself apart just to escape the sound. This was no god, no savior, no demon. This was the thing gods feared. Melisandre let out a strangled gasp, her ruby flickering wildly at her throat. She tried to whisper a prayer, but no words came. Her god was not here. The Night King bowed deeper, and the creature that had been Jon Snow spoke its name again. The moment the word left its lips, the world itself seemed to bend inward. Davos saw visions, a great darkness before fire, a time when the sky was not blue, but red, when things that had no shape walked the world freely. He saw the first White Walker created, the moment the children of the forest had plunged dragonglass into a man's heart, but it had not been their will alone that shaped him. It had been this thing in Jon Snow's body, this forgotten god. The Night King had not been his own master. He had been a pawn, a mere reflection of something greater, something older, something that had been waiting for the right moment to return. And Melisandre, blind in her faith, had given it a door. The creature that had been Jon Snow stepped forward, standing directly before the kneeling Night King. It reached out, pressing one burned, ruined hand against the cold, dead flesh of the White Walker's forehead. The world shook. The Night King let out a breath, a single, frozen breath, his body flickering like an image on broken glass. Then he was gone, not shattered, not destroyed, unmade. The Night King, the legend, the fear, the doom of men, ceased to exist. Not a trace of him remained. The silence that followed was deeper than any night. Davos, gasping, barely able to comprehend what he had just witnessed, forced himself to look up. The creature that had once been Jon Snow turned toward him. Its black eyes were endless, empty voids. Then it smiled. "You are free now," it said. "For now." And the sky began to bleed. The sky wept red, thick twisting clouds split apart, and a sickening crimson glow bathed Castle Black. The wind howled, carrying with it a sound that did not belong in this world, a low, keening wail, something neither human nor beast, something that had been buried in the frozen depths of time. Davos's breath came in ragged gasps. His body trembled, his bones ached. He had survived wars, storms, fire, and betrayal. But this was something else. He turned to Melisandre. The Red Woman was on her knees, her hands clutching at her ruby necklace, as if trying to force it to glow brighter, to summon her god, to bring back the fire. But there was no fire left. Not here. Not any more. The thing that had once been Jon Snow stood still, watching the sky shift, the red deepening, as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. "Well, what have you done?" Melisandre's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. The creature's black eyes flickered as it turned toward her. "What you asked for." She flinched. "You prayed for a god to answer," it continued, stepping forward. "And one did." Davos felt sick. This was wrong. This was beyond wrong. He forced himself to stand, though his legs screamed in protest. "If you're not Jon Snow, if you're not the Night King, Then what the bloody hell are you? The creature studied him for a long moment. Then with slow, deliberate precision, it lifted a hand, pale, burned, fingers twisted into something almost human, and with a single gesture, the wall cracked. Not a small fracture, not a break, a deep, splitting wound. The ice, thousands of years old, came apart like rotted wood. Castle Black shook, the sound of splitting ice roaring like thunder. The men of the Night's Watch, those who had not already fled, let out cries of terror as massive sheets of ice collapsed, sending shockwaves through the earth. Davos staggered back, his mind unable to process what was happening. The wall was breaking, the thing inside Jon Snow. It was unmaking it, and then, as if tearing apart a curtain, the darkness beyond the wall split open. Something moved in the shadows beyond, something vast. Something waking up. Davos had no words for what he saw. The White Walkers had been a nightmare, but whatever this was, whatever it had summoned, was something far worse, and for the first time in his life, Davos Seaworth truly understood fear. The creature turned its gaze back to him, smiling once more. Winter was never the end, it whispered. It was only the beginning. The wall collapsed. A roar, like the shattering of the world itself, echoed across the north as thousands of years of ice gave way, crumbling in massive, earth-shaking slabs. The men of Castle Black could only watch in horror as the ancient barrier between the realms of men and the unknown was erased. But what lay beyond was not just death. Davos Seaworth had spent his life believing in what he could see, touch, and fight with steel, but as he staggered back, his eyes drawn to the abyss that had once been the far north, he understood that there were things in this world far worse than the dead. The land beyond the wall was no longer just ice and snow. It was shifting, moving. A darkness bled into the air, thick like smoke but alive. Shapes twisted in the mist, writhing, as if something buried beneath the earth for thousands of years had just taken its first breath. Davos didn't know what he was seeing. He didn't want to. "Melisandre!" He turned, reaching for her. "What is this?" The Red Woman was still on her knees, her eyes wide, her lips moving silently. There was no prayer left in her, no faith, no fire, only horror. "This was never R'hllor," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Not the Lord of Light, not the Great Other." She turned her gaze to Davos, and for the first time, true fear filled her crimson eyes. "This is something older, something in the abyss. Beyond the wall moved. It did not step, it did not crawl, it simply was." A deep, guttural sound rippled through the night. Not a roar, not a scream, but something wrong. A vibration that curled through their bones, something felt more than heard. Davos clutched his chest, gasping for air. It was in his lungs, in his blood. The thing inside Jon Snow, the thing that had taken his body, turned back toward the broken wall, its black eyes reflecting the hunger of the void. It raised a hand, and from the darkness, something answered. A legion, not of whites, not of the frozen dead. These things did not shamble. They flowed, their bodies like shadows wrapped in false flesh, as if the very concept of form was an afterthought. Some crawled on too many limbs, others stood too tall, their proportions shifting, their movements unnatural, and their eyes, not blue, not human, but burning voids of pure hunger. The Night's Watch had been built to stand against the White Walkers, but the White Walkers had never been the true threat. This was the real enemy, and they had just been set free. The creature inside Jon Snow stepped forward, standing at the edge of the abyss. It breathed in, as if drinking in the horror it had unleashed. Then it turned back to Davos. "You were afraid of winter," it murmured, voice smooth as smoke. It smiled. "You should have been afraid of what comes after." Davos staggered back, his chest heaving, his pulse hammering in his ears. The wall was gone, the Night King was gone, and in their place stood something worse. The creatures emerging from the abyss did not move like men, nor wights, nor beasts. They did not belong in this world. Their very forms shifted, as if the world itself struggled to contain them. Davos had thought he had seen the face of death. Now he realized he had only ever seen its shadow. The thing inside Jon Snow, the thing that wore his body like a whisper. Of memory watched the horrors pour forth from the abyss, and it was pleased. "You understand now, don't you?" it said, turning to Davos, its black eyes gleaming. Davos could barely speak. You did this." The creature laughed, a sound like fire curling around a dying breath. "I only opened the door." The earth trembled beneath them as the abyss stretched further, the shadows inside it bleeding into the land. The shapes did not stop. They did not end. Davos had seen the White Walkers march, their ranks a sea of cold and silence. But these things did not march. They devoured. The land withered beneath their presence, collapsing, unraveling, fading as if they were not merely killing, but erasing. Melisandre screamed. The ruby at her throat flashed violently, as if something inside it fought to be heard, but it was too late. The Lord of Light had abandoned her. Her faith, her power, meant nothing. Now Davos grabbed her, shaking her violently. "What is this? What are they? What in the seven hells is happening?" She was weeping. The great and powerful Red Woman was weeping. "They are the Forgotten," she whispered. "The first darkness. The gods that were buried before fire was given. A name." She turned to Davos, her voice raw with horror. "We were afraid of the Great Other, but even he feared what lay beneath." The sky ripped open further, the crimson bleeding into black. Davos felt it now. Not just fear. The end. The thing inside. Jon Snow sighed, almost fondly. "Men fought over winter, over gods, over light and shadow," it murmured. "But in the end, they were all just waiting to be consumed." It turned away from Davos and Melisandre, stepping toward the abyss, arms open like a king embracing his kingdom. The shadows reached for it, and they welcomed him home. The last thing Davos saw before the darkness took the world was Jon Snow's ruined, burning face, smiling, and then the world ceased to be. There was nothing, no cold, no warmth, no breath, no sound, just void. Davos Seaworth had always believed that when a man died, there was something after. Whether it was the seven heavens, the flames of R'hllor, or the cold embrace of the stranger, something would be waiting. But as he opened his eyes, if he even had eyes anymore, he saw only an endless, shifting darkness. And then a voice. "You are persistent." Davos turned, or rather he felt himself turn, but he had no body, no form. He was a thought, a memory, a whisper, and before him stood the thing that had once been Jon Snow. It was no longer burned, no longer broken. It shimmered, its shape shifting, not bound to one form. It could have been a man, a god, a shadow, but its eyes remained, black, infinite, a doorway into something worse than death. Davos tried to speak, but words had no meaning here. Still, the creature understood. "You want to know where you are." The darkness around them twisted, revealing glimpses of things that should not be, a land of fire, where men screamed as they were consumed forever. A frozen wasteland, where ice did not bring death, but something far worse. A great abyss, filled with things that had no name, waiting, watching, and then a throne. A throne that had existed before fire, before light. A throne that did not belong to men, nor gods, nor even the monsters of the north, and upon it, something. And that Davos could not comprehend it. His mind bent, twisted, broke as he tried to see the creature beside him, the thing that had worn Jon Snow's skin, knelt, not in servitude, in recognition. The thing on the throne stirred, and Davos finally understood. The White Walkers had been a mistake. The Night King had been a child playing with borrowed power. But this was the true end, not just for Westeros, For everything, Davos felt himself begin to fade, his thoughts unraveled, his memories torn apart like dry parchment, and as the last remnants of what he had once been disappeared into the void, he heard Jon Snow's voice one last time. It was never winter you should have feared. It was what lay beneath it, and then nothing remained. There was no dawn, no sun, no sky, no stars. The world was gone, not destroyed, not burned, not drowned, unmade. Nothing remained of Westeros. No frozen north, no wall, no castles, no kings, no gods, no whispers of the past. Only silence. And yet, within the void, something stirred. Not Davos. Davos was no more. Not Melisandre. She had been swallowed by her own failure, not the Night King. His story had ended before it even began, but the thing that had worn Jon Snow's skin still remained. It stood on the edge of nothingness, gazing at the emptiness it had brought forth. The end of all things, and then, in that vast abyss, a single voice spoke. It is done. The words did not come from the thing that had been Jon Snow. They came from the throne. The unseen throne that had existed before time, before fire, before men. The thing in Jon's body, or what was left of it, turned toward the great darkness that ruled all. And it knelt, not in surrender, not in defeat, in fulfillment. A promise made in the ancient past had been fulfilled. The cycle of light and shadow, of war and peace, of life and death had ended. There was nothing left to fight for, no kingdoms, no prophecy, no gods, only the void, only what had always been waiting, and as the last ember of reality flickered one final time, the universe itself exhaled, and then at long last, everything was truly over.